If anti-trans discrimination and harassment wasn't already bad enough, Kansas is now introducing a bounty hunter bill to encourage random people to patrol bathrooms, even of private places, to hunt down trans people for a monetary reward. There's some really horrifying legislation coming out of Kansas, and the Substack Aaron in the Morning, compiled by Aaron Reed, has some information on this bill. She writes that while anti trans bathroom bills that require people to use bathrooms that align with their biological sex at birth have been on the rise in states around the US. Most of those bills have focused on K through 12 schools, and some have expanded to places like colleges, universities, and public spaces. Up until now, they haven't affected private businesses, but this new proposed legislation would. Aaron Reed reports a bill now racing through the Kansas legislature would not only authorize criminal charges and civil penalties against trans people who violate the ban, but it would also empower private citizens to act as bounty hunters, seeking out trans people in bathrooms, including ones at private businesses, and suing them for substantial sums of money. So these amended bills, SB 244 and HB 2426, would bar transgender people from updating the gender marker on their driver's licenses, going so far as to revoke existing licenses and force people to surrender them in exchange for documents bearing the incorrect sex. Then there are sections of the bill that apply to both public buildings and new separate sections that would also apply to private buildings. So, in regards to the definition of public buildings, you have everything from highway rest stops and municipal parks to public schools and public universities. But the separate section of the bill, Aaron writes, would make it the most extreme anti transgender measure in the United States. This section creates a private right of action, which would allow individuals to sue trans people they encounter in bathrooms basically anywhere. So, this section specifically reads any individual who, while accessing a multiple occupancy private space designed for use only by such individuals' sex, is aggrieved by the invasion of such individuals' personal privacy or is otherwise harmed by a violation of this section by an individual of the opposite sex may bring a cause of action against such individual of the opposite sex. The individual may seek either actual damages or liquidated damages in the amount of $1,000, as well as declaratory and injunctive relief. It shall be an affirmative defense to any claim brought pursuant to this subsection that the defendant did not know that the multiple occupancy private space was designated for use only by individuals of the opposite sex, and all civil actions brought pursuant to this subsection shall be commenced within 2 years after the violation occurred. An individual bringing any such action who prevails shall recover reasonable attorney fees and costs. So, what all of this legalese boils down to is that if anyone enters a bathroom, whether it's a public space or a private one in the state of Kansas, and there's a trans person using that bathroom with them, they then have 2 years to begin this legal action. They can seek a number of attorney's fees and damages, creating a strong civil penalty against trans people, as well as an incentive for other people to patrol bathrooms in this way. Basically, it's a legalized form of harassment and discrimination based on somebody's gender identity. Reporting from local outlet The Kansas Reflector reveals some of the arguments that were made against this bill, including from a trans representative in the state. First of all, the Reflector reports that this bill was pushed through the Kansas House despite rules that should have prevented that. Specifically, House Majority Leader Chris Croft called for emergency action to take the vote immediately after debating the bill instead of waiting a day as rules require. Senate Bill 244 passed on an 87-36 vote along party lines with just one Republican opposed. The Senate concurred on Wednesday, voting 30-9, also along party lines, and the bill will next go to Governor Laura Kelly, who is expected to veto the legislation, but it passed both chambers with the two-thirds majority needed to override that veto. Democrats fought this based on mainly two things. One, that the bill was rushed through the legislative process, and two, that it is a completely inhumane attack on transgender people. Representative Susan Ruiz was quoted as saying, "This bill spits on basic human decency, and I'm embarrassed we had to spend the entire day trying to defeat this thing." She also believes that the bill was targeted at a specific legislator, Representative Abby Boatman, who is a transgender woman. At the close of the debate, Boatman said, "I have sat here for 5.5 hours and listened to this entire room debate my humanity and my ability to participate in the most basic functions of society. From the bottom of my heart, I hope none of you have to ever sit through something like that." Absolutely gutting. Now, the House Minority Leader in Kansas did say that he thinks that this bill will lose in court, but it is still such an enormous waste of time, resources, energy, and legal fight to preserve basic rights afforded to trans people. It's also important to note that bills like this are framed as an issue of women's safety in particular, with the false idea and smear that having transgender women in bathrooms endangers cisgender women. The opposite is actually true, which we'll continue to get more into in a moment. But I wanted to highlight what Representative Alexis Simmons said. She said she felt compelled to speak up as a survivor of sexual trauma because of the argument that it endangers trauma victims in particular. She said, "I'm a victim of sexual assault, and never once did I think it was somebody else's responsibility to manage my trauma. I feel enormous sympathy for victims of trauma, that goes without saying, but I do not appreciate my trauma being used to justify legislation that we know will cause harm to people." She said she felt more threatened by men than she had ever felt by a transgender person. Continuing on to say, "Here in this building, as an intern, as a committee assistant, as staff, and as a legislator, I have been sexually harassed more than you would believe. If we're going to talk about women's safety, we should address the real trauma, which is how women are treated, not putting the spotlight on one new member of our legislature." This is a really great point, and taking it a step further, transgender women, trans people in general, gender nonconforming people, LGBTQ people are all more likely to face gender-based violence like sexual harassment and assault, more so than they are likely to be offenders or perpetrators of it. And discriminatory measures and culture war issues like these only increase the likelihood that trans people and other marginalized communities will face violence. The reality is that there are not widespread cases of trans people using bathrooms as a place to prey on cis people, but actually, the opposite is happening in part because of these bills. And it's not just affecting trans women, it's also affecting cis women who don't conform to gender stereotypes. Just this past August, NBC News reported that a teenager in Minnesota said she had to prove her gender to a Buffalo Wild Wings employee by unzipping her hoodie to show her that she had breasts. This horrifying story is something that is becoming all too common thanks to these anti trans bathroom bills that are affecting not just trans women, but also cis children and teenagers. The article says that Jera Kamuja, an 18-year-old biracial lesbian teenager, went to get dinner with a friend at Buffalo Wild Wings just south of Minneapolis. When she went to the restroom, a server followed her inside and banged on the stall door while saying, "This is a woman's restroom. The man needs to get out of here." However, Muja says that when she came out of the stall and told the server, "I'm a lady," the server still responded, "You have to get out now." So Muja unzipped her hoodie to show that she has breasts. The server didn't say anything in response, but left the bathroom. Quote, "She made me feel very uncomfortable. After that, I just don't like going in public bathrooms. I just hold it in. I want to be able to use the bathroom in peace." This is such a horrifying story that goes to show how anti trans bathroom bills can have these rippling out impacts on all kinds of women who are gender nonconforming, whether they're cis, trans, or otherwise. This is a form of sexual harassment. Ironically, it's the other way around from what these Republicans who are trying to pass these bills say is happening in bathrooms. They're claiming that trans women are the perpetrators of this type of harassment, when in reality, they're the victims of it. And so are cis women who people believe to be trans. And this is happening more and more, especially to gender nonconforming lesbians who are cis women. A couple months before that, a woman said a security guard at a high-end hotel in Boston confronted her in the bathroom and asked her to prove her gender. CBS News reported that Ansley Baker and her girlfriend Liz Victor went to a Kentucky Derby party at the hotel on Saturday, but their afternoon ended when hotel security searched the women's restroom and allegedly asked them to show their ID to prove their sex. This was a male security guard who came into the women's restroom and started banging on the stall doors. How ironic again. Bigoted conservative rhetoric suggests that trans women are actually men who are coming into cis women's spaces and harassing them. The reality is, due to this anti trans rhetoric, Real cis men are coming into women's bathrooms and harassing them. Now, this also isn't a new issue whatsoever. This exact pattern of behavior has been happening now for over a decade. And for proof, look no further than this editorial written by an attorney for the ACLU in May 2016. He said, like any good attorney, I enjoy winning and being right. However, as a transgender attorney, watching the fallout from anti trans legislation across the country spin out of control, this is one time I wanted to be wrong. I wanted to be wrong about the prediction that anti trans legislation and rhetoric would spur further discrimination and hostility toward all people, not just trans folks. Sadly, this hatred of trans people has had the exact result we anticipated: increased harassment of all people in bathrooms, as well as continued pernicious violence against trans women. So there is literally no excuse for Republican legislators across the country to continue these lies and smear campaigns against trans people when we know the opposite is true. Anti-trans legislation puts a target on the back of trans people, yes. It also spirals out and affects all kinds of people, whether they're trans or not. At this point, we have to consider that they're actually opposed to women's safety because there is more than enough evidence to suggest that what they are doing is actually hurting women. But despite knowing that this hurts all women, both cis and trans, the state of anti-trans bathroom bans in the US today is looking more and more dire. This graphic compiled by LGBT Map shows the spread of these bills across the country. The dark red states here, like Utah, Montana, Texas, Wyoming, South Dakota, Arkansas, and Florida, are states that ban transgender people from using bathrooms and facilities consistent with their gender identity in all government-owned buildings and spaces, including K through 12 schools, colleges, and more. These dark orange states like North Dakota, Idaho, Ohio, West Virginia, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama ban transgender people from using bathrooms and facilities in K through 12 schools and at least some government-owned buildings. In these light orange states like Iowa, Kentucky, Virginia, Tennessee, and South Carolina, trans people are banned from using bathrooms and facilities in K through 12 schools. And in the other states, there are so far no state bans on trans people's use of bathrooms and facilities. But in Kansas, we now know that this could be changing very soon, and it has this warning flag there to symbolize that. As Erin Reed pointed out in her Substack, the bounty hunter provision here is especially dangerous. It incentivizes random people to go out of their way to stalk and harass women of all kinds in public bathrooms, giving them a financial reward for doing so. And that isn't a unique feature of just anti trans legislation. In Texas, which already has some of the worst anti trans laws on the books, there's also a similar bounty hunting provision regarding abortion access. Last summer, the Abortion Everyday Substack reported on this Texas bill, which would let private citizens sue anyone who mails abortion pills into the state for at least $100,000. Anyone who so much as touches the medication on its way to a patient could be targeted: manufacturers, distributors, hotline operators, even a loved one who picks up the pills from a P.O. box. And yet again, this is pushed under the name Women and Children Protection Act, even though it actually endangers both of them. Abortion Every Day points out this is especially ironic considering Texas's abortion ban is responsible for a surge in maternal and infant mortality, literally killing women and children, all under the guise of supposedly protecting them. And the way that the anti-abortion bounty bill operates is somehow even more insidious. Under HB 7, Abortion Everyday writes, those directly connected to an abortion, like the pregnant person or the father of the fetus, can sue the provider, manufacturer, or anyone else who sends the bills for $100,000. But it doesn't stop there. Any private citizen who isn't directly involved can also sue for $100,000, with 90% of that bounty going to a charitable organization. This essentially legalizes sting operations. An Abortion Every Day reports there doesn't even have to be an abortion for someone to sue. Simply shipping the pills into Texas, or even intending to, would be enough to spark a lawsuit whether or not anyone ever uses them. Abortion Every Day, as well as Erin in the Morning, have both been doing incredible reporting on the consequences of these types of legislation. For example, example, they embolden abusers to go after victims with the full support of the state behind them, even providing a monetary incentive to do so. And all of this is about limiting and tracking the spread of freedom of movement for women, whether they are cis or trans. These are extreme, authoritarian, anti women bills, and we all need to be paying attention to them, whether we're trans or not. Going to the bathroom makes us all human, and people deserve privacy and security in the bathroom. The existence of trans people in our communities wasn't threatening that privacy or security at all, but these draconian anti trans bathroom bills do just that. They invoke harassment, even stalking and surveillance of all types of vulnerable people, and they have to stop now. Allowing state governments like Texas and Kansas to get away with these bills creates a patchwork and a playbook for enforcing even more extreme repression of women and marginalized people in the future. Everyone just deserves to be able to go to the bathroom in peace.